Okay, so like I said, we've got thresholding of noisy data from Matt Kenny. We've got a general overview of feature request that was put forth by Meg Noble from TIMET. Region-specific thresholding suggested by Johan in Cape Town, South Africa. And batch processing of different images by Matt Kenny. And those were the top 4 voted subjects. You all are welcome, of course, to be here as long as you can. I plan to be here for 3 hours from 2 to 5 or until everyone is left. So we also have the topics of particle and grain size analysis, distinguishing different microstructural features, measuring individual features, including in that automating the ID of those measured features, making 3D workflows more efficient, segmenting overlapping precipitates, pairing of structures, which I do want to get to if we can, even though there was only 1 vote for it, and then finally using the optimization function. Now, I had finally finished off a number of tutorials yesterday, including optimizing steps, and I ran into technical difficulties with our website service and was unable to upload those. They tell me they're working to fix that in a couple of days. So as soon as they're fixed, there'll be a flood of new tutorials up there, including using the optimization function. So I have broken out some example images here in each of those different subjects with the permission, of course, of everyone who supplied those. Thank you very much, first of all, to those that supplied data. I will try my best to incorporate those data in the webinar and make sure all of your questions or some of your questions get answered. We'll start with the thresholding of noisy data example, and this will be a very open format, so I don't have much in the way of rehearsal here. I'm going to start working with images, and I want folks to please speak up and kind of direct where you want this to go, because this is really for you all. So when it comes to thresholding noisy data, since Matt Kenny was the proposer of that topic, I guess I wanted to first ask Matt, since you weren't able to provide any images by noisy data, could you clarify really what you mean by that? Okay, Jennifer. Yeah, after Matt answers, I'll go and I'll just, for an overview, you just like to see the different apps opened up and a quick description of what they do. Yeah, Matt, if you could just email those images to me, then I'll be sure to use those. That would be helpful. Thank you. Okay, and please raise your hand or type if anything drops out technical-wise for you. I'll be keeping an eye on the chats and try not to miss anybody. So overview, we have our image processor, which most of you will use probably more than any of the other apps. If you're doing 2D or 3D image analysis, this is where you will construct your segmentation recipe for finding the features of interest. So there's all of your processing functions are up here in the menu bar. Shortcut functions that are accessed commonly are here in the shortcut bar. Interactive tools, calibrating your magnification or scale, a few important image properties, and any element in this window that you right-click on gets highlighted, and a description of what it does is shown up here. Also, as processes get added or as you open up interface GUIs, you get a description of what each of those do in the help box. And in the other the other two apps that the help box is featured, the purple and the yellow, those help texts are getting finished up, and I hope to have not only all of the help boxes fully functional, but each of the GUIs for setting up parameters, all of the UI elements in those will have tooltip strings attached. So when you hover over one of the slider or one of the boxes, it'll tell you a little bit about what that parameter does. I hope that helps. To finish up in this app, let me go grab a example image. Absolutely, absolutely. Go ahead, sir. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. Okay. Sure. Most of the processing I do on two-dimensional images, I'd say average, they're about 1,500 by 1,000 pixels, a couple of megabytes. On a 2D image, we process all the way up to 4K images. MIPAR definitely does slow down in that circumstance. Not ideal. So if you can stay down near 2000, you should have a good experience. I'd say you'd have a workable experience depending on your hardware, up to 4 and 5K. 3D wise, it obviously the smaller the data set, the better. But we're able to work with, I would say, 200-300 slice stacks where every slice is 2K by 4K without too much issue. If you're looking at 500 slices of 4K apiece, it's going to struggle. So any cropping or resizing that you can do ahead of time without sacrificing necessary resolution is always advised. Sorry, let me grab the image that I was going to open up. So in beta 7, I should add, and if there's blowback to this, let me know. But I'm doing away with this prompt box that opens when you open color images. It's just going to automatically choose an auto channel operation. So you're going to have your full color image as your reference if you work with color images, and it's automatically going to choose the auto scheme to turn it into intensity data for the processing. Because I think that got a little bit annoying, always having to deal with that dialogue. Just a side note there. So image is opened. We'll use this image later on, maybe for some examples. A number of you are familiar with the common interface here. See, you do have help for every item that you select. Some of these are starting to be tool-tipped. They'll all get filled out very soon, hopefully in 7, possibly in 8. So let's pick, okay, so as you select each step and set its parameters, it gets added to the recipe, and you can add on multiple steps after that. Using either typing in or using the sliders. features are black by default in MIPAR. That's a pretty important convention. Now we can run a watershed step where we, and I am sensitive or aware that these ranges can be not ideal sometimes, the slider ranges. So if you drag this to the center, almost never are you going to be operating up at 88 of a weakness value for watershedding. For separating black and white features, I'm almost always down under 10. For watershedding a grayscale image directly, instead of splitting up binary features, I'm usually up between 10 and 30. So I am going to change some of the default ranges of the sliders so that they make some more sense. Changing your viewing mode at any time to see your segmentation either as a black and white, an overlay, an outline, or the features colored according to them being separate. And you can of course change the color map that you want to work with. Now these are just labels here. These are just randomly colored. It's not, it doesn't correlate with size or anything, but that is something we're going to cover. Making measurements, so taking global measurements, a single metric for the image. Those are all under the measurements drop-down. Feature measurements, so getting a metric for each feature is in here in feature measurements. So if we wanted to get the, say, equivalent diameter of every feature, which is the diameter if that feature's area belonged to a circle. If you want to get another option for feature diameter is using intercepts here. You can really always keep those at 0. There'll be some more information that pops up about that, again, once everything is tool-tipped. Running 100 lines through the center of every feature is what this would do. That's another way to measure diameter. You can measure things like eccentricity for each. Set your measurements file and generate, and we can actually execute that later on in one of the, I think we'll cover that in the measuring individuals features section. A note that in beta 7, I think this makes a little bit more sense, since the layers setting is something that's pretty common, fairly important attribute of a recipe. Now down above the recipe box you'll see both optimize and layers as buttons. So this layers will move down above the recipe box, and in its place will be measure features will move over, and over here will be color by measure. Right now that's only available here, but that will in beta 7 be available from the shortcut bar. And I think that better organizes the functions. If you have a recipe built and you want to add a step above or below any other step with wherever you are selected in the recipe, let's say we just add an erosion step. If you're at the very top, it'll ask you, do you want to put it above or below? But if I was right here, then by default it's going to put it always below this step. So I would add in an erosion step. That would get added below where I had selected, and then the rest get automatically re-executed, and you're shown whatever you were looking at before you made the edit. Same works with removing steps. Remove a step and the recipe gets updated, or edit the parameter steps and the recipe gets updated. Okay. That's, I think, enough of an overview for the image processor. If you have a recipe that you want to apply to multiple images, you can launch the batch processor directly. It's telling me, okay, now I've made a recipe, but I haven't saved it, so you could elect to save it now, and then it would launch the batch processor. Normally you would have saved it ahead of time if it's something you wanted to use, so I'm just going to call this one test. And launch the batch processor, and the recipe is brought in. Or if you launched the batch processor from the launch bar, it would come in, the window would open and be empty, and you would choose to load a particular recipe. These are our grayscale images, so that's what we would like set for this case. If you're working with color images, this is where your channel operation gets entered, and this would be the mechanism of converting your color to grayscale. So usually auto does what folks need, but if you put red R plus B or red plus blue, you're using an arithmetic operation on the channels of the color image to produce your intensity image or your grayscale image that MIPAR uses for segmentation. So you're able to still deal with color images in this case. If you say have red features and blue features, your recipe would look like opening the image, do I have an example? Is there anyone that wants to see opening a color image? Doesn't look like it. Okay, no problem. Send me an email anytime. I think many of you have worked with color images, but you seem to be getting along pretty good. Yes, Meg, so 1500 by 1000 is a pretty small image. We have definitely worked with 10K by 3500. That is going to be slow, but we have worked with it. I guess it's really going to depend on the hardware configuration, and the only way to know is to test it out. MIPAR will open it, and you can certainly process it, but it's obviously going to be slower than 1500 by 1000. So the only real solution is to try it out on your hardware and see how it goes. So yeah, we're in the batch processor, choosing the image type where you want to save the output, add the images to be processed, and I think this is fairly self-explanatory in what it does. Seeing it in operation is helpful, so we can get into that later on. Your processed image editor is where the output of the batch gets reviewed. So as an example, if we have Christopher Strock from Penn State University was kind enough to let us use the images that I worked on with him, segmenting cross-sections of a plant root of some kind. So here are the segmentations that came out of the cross-section of each root. And if I add my original images or reference images, that's what they look like. So he wanted to find the cross-section of the root in each case, as well as these vessels in the center. So I've added here a set of images. I have a layer. I'm just going to call these cross-section. And then we can add a second layer, and I'm going to call these vessels. This would all happen automatically after the batch was run. Once the batch was complete, if you clicked Review Processed Images, your processed image editor gets opened automatically, and the data gets brought in the right configuration with all of the layers that you have set. So here are the results of that batch process. You can look at the layers view, and you'll see this is green, indicating, just like this drop-down is, that the vessels is the selected layer, so any edits that you make or any measurements that you take pertain to the vessels layer, but you're still able to see all of the layers present at once, either in an outline or overlay fashion. So this is a helpful tool for reviewing the success of all of the recipe on each image, and when necessary, going in and, say, getting rid of a feature that doesn't belong, or adding one that you missed. The region grow tool at the moment has a bug, which some of you may have caught, that is already fixed for beta 7. It's basically like a magic wand tool in Photoshop, where you click on a feature and say fill, and based on the pixel value that you clicked and your tolerance value, it will automatically select similar pixels surrounding it. So it would be perfect for picking any of the vessels that you missed in this case. And before you proceed, before you move to a new image, the slider gets locked in the case of an edit, since every time you move the slider, you're actually reading in the images off of the hard drive. So while the unsaved edits is shown, this is locked. You can advance to a new image by double-clicking on that image, but it's going to warn you that by doing so, you're going to discard your changes. So you can choose to do that if you want. I'm going to stop with the overview for there, since I don't think we have a whole lot of 3D folks in the webinar. If there are some, I'll try to. One of the topics was making 3D workflows more efficient, so I'll show at least what a 3D workflow can look like, and then have you tell me if that's not efficient enough. Is there anyone here that is working with 3D data and wanted to see examples of that shown? Okay. And I'm sorry, is this Ken, just to be clear? Okay, thanks. Sure. Yes. No, I'll definitely get to that. Thank you. Let's start with one of the thresholding noisy data examples, I suppose, and Kim is okay. Thank you, Kim. So what would be a good example to start with here? I'm not sure if this qualifies as noisy data. So here we have a fib slice from a serial section, and I can show you the recipe that we made for it. Some of these I can try to build one up live if you'd like. So this user was pretty pleased with this segmentation, so I'm using that as a point of measure. We first ran a median filter, and that did improve the noise somewhat. Then we went with a adaptive threshold step, which is, there's usually one of those in most recipes. So I think I settled on this fairly manually, which is of course subjective. So the adaptive threshold is working by looking at every pixel one at a time, and it's considering a window of pixels around it, around each one of this size, 25 pixels. And the default settings would be that pixels get made white if, in our case, their intensity value, if a considered pixel's intensity is 97% or more of the average intensity in its window, it gets made white. And if it's less than 97%, then it gets made black. So you can assess each pixel based on its percentage of its surrounding intensity or on a strict deviation from that intensity. So in this case, a pixel would need to be more than 3 intensity values away from its local average in order to be white. And if it's 3 units or less, then it's black. So I almost always, when I start off with an adaptive threshold, I will go in and I'll use my distance line here, and I'll get a rough idea of the scale of my features. 30 seems like a reasonable feature scale. So we'll start with 30, and I usually just start with 100, and I see how that looks, and then I start adjusting my slider. And I think this is about where I settled. Now this might be a good time to show the optimization feature. So as an aid to deciding those parameters, whatever you have set, when you have a step selected, if this optimize button is lit up, that means it's an optimizable step. So if we click it, we get a prompt to set up the optimization. I'm going to use the prior image as the comparison here, which is the median filter step. So what this is going to do is you're going to define a range of parameters, and it's going to loop through them and perform the segmentation at each parameter combination and compare each result back to whatever you have selected using either mutual information between the segmented and the comparison or the intra-class variance. I don't know if we want to go into elaborating on exactly what those are in this tutorial. They're metrics of image similarity. Mutual information, it looks to maximize that between segmented and comparison. Intra-class variance, it looks to minimize that. So it's worth trying out each to see which result agrees more with your intuition. I mean, the point is that there's no magic going on here, and even though this is far more objective than choosing values from a slider bar with no guidance, if you pick mutual information versus intra-class variance, or you pre-filter the comparison image, you're going to get different so-called optimum results each time. So it's still going to rely on you having an idea of what the segmentation should look like and choosing the metric to use so that you don't get something that's way off in left field. We're going to pick the entire image instead of just a subregion. All that will say accept, and I'm going to put in a window size of, we'll go all the way down to 10 up to 50 in steps of 5, and we'll go from 90 to 110 in steps of 1. So now what it's doing is it's trying out each of those combinations, and you're getting this mutual information value at each step. And when it's done, it's going to show you a plot of one parameter versus the other versus mutual information, and it's picked the one that maximized that value. And since it's not on the edge of our parameter space, I feel pretty good about that. Now, if you leave this step as optimized with the 2 asterisks, it says it's an optimized step, and you save the recipe like this, that calculation that you just saw would get performed every time this recipe is applied to an image. So if you're running this on a stack and you've got contrast changes through the stack that you didn't accommodate through other means like histogram normalization, auto levels adjustment, that kind of thing, then having an optimized step can let your recipe be flexible. So usually with noisy data, you end up maybe filtering it ahead of time with some kind of either a median filter, or a Wiener filter can be a decent approach. This is somewhat like a median filter, except edges are better preserved. And see, there's an example of where the sliders make no sense. You're never going to be up that high. The max value is the max dimension of the image, but with this kind of filter, you're almost always down under 10, so that range needs to be adjusted. So this is like a median filter, except edges are better preserved. So that's another approach to pre-filtering some of the noise. And then you're going to go with some kind of thresholding step. Let me also show, in the spirit of showing everything with optimization, sometimes your optimization with an adaptive threshold, when you're varying both window size and threshold value, sometimes no matter what the range you set, your optimum window size is always up against the upper range of your limit. And you can widen the range and widen the range, and you always end up with the highest possible window size. And in that case, what I think is happening is there are low frequency intensity variations in the image. Basically, you've got varying intensity within each feature from one feature to the next that isn't really helping matters. What you're really after is identifying the boundaries of the features, the edges of the features. So I've had some success in what I'll do now, which is I'll go and, before any of my pre-processing, I'll add a recall to the original image just as kind of a placeholder. And then above that, I'll go and I'll add an FFT filter. And we'll make a high-pass FFT filter. So this is the fast Fourier transform of the image. We're looking at the image in frequency space now. And we see this band here. Well, that's because we have a lot of features that are oriented along this vector. So your high frequencies in the image, if I make a high-pass filter or allow the high frequencies to pass, and this sigma value affects the size of that filter. As I make it bigger, I filter more and more of the image. I'm erasing lower frequencies, and I end up changing the image from this to this. So it's very similar. A high-pass filter is similar, or is in fact identical almost to, it is identical to a Gaussian blur and subtract operation. By blurring the image, you're keeping the lower frequencies and then subtracting them away, leaving the higher frequencies. It's usually easier to understand that than understanding a high-pass filter. If we switch over to low-pass, you see we're now keeping only the lower frequencies, which are your more gradual intensity transitions in the image. So this is similar to running a blur operation on the image. So usually if I set up a high-pass filtered variant of the image, what this is doing is it's making the edges more significant in the image than the other lower frequency information. So a strong high-pass filter can be somewhat of an edge-find filter. It's not so obvious in this case, but usually your edges become brighter or than everything else in the image. So if you run a high-pass filter and then threshold on that, that can work as an edge-find filter. So I'm going to use something like 5 or maybe 7. We're going to add that, and then underneath that I'm going to set this in memory as restore image 1. So now when I go back to, I have my median filter. I've recalled the original. I have a median filter here. When I go and I optimize this, so with this step optimized, clicking edit doesn't edit its parameters as is conventional. You end up editing the optimization parameters. So I'm going to instead of using the prior image for comparison, which is the median filter, I'm going to use that FFT filtered version. Remember, I'm still performing the threshold on the median filter image. I'm just using the FFT filtered image for comparison to the segmentation. And since that FFT filter image makes the edges matter more than everything else, I find that your optimized parameters tend to agree more with what your human brain is telling you should be optimum. I'm going to run the same loop here, but again, now I'm comparing the segmentation to the high-pass filtered version. And we'll see what it comes back with. I think it was, so now we're down here at 15 and 101. It usually ends up reducing your window size relative to what you would get without it. And on average, I tend to like the optimized results better when running off of that comparison image or running off of the FFT image. So we have our rough threshold here, black and white. Then we run a classic erosion step that gets rid of sparse noise that's usually present in the case of noisy images. Classic erosion is saying look at every black pixel, and if it's surrounded by 6 or more white pixels, make it white, and then loop that through the image 10 times. So the higher you make this number, the more restrictive your filter is going to be and the less you're going to get rid of. The lower you make this number, the fewer white pixels black ones need to be surrounded by in order to get made white, so it's going to end up being a much stronger erosion. So 5 or 6 is usually what we choose for a classic erosion. 6 if you want less aggressive behavior. And usually this depth saturates at about 10, so the more iterations you use, you've already exhausted all of the black pixels that need to be switched, so nothing much more is going to happen after 10. Dilation, we then go in the other direction. That fills in some of the white noise. And then we have a small white artifact rejection step and a black artifact, and finally a smoothing step. And maybe we would have wanted to go a little bit more aggressive with the white artifact. So we've chosen to reject anything less than or equal to 7 pixels in area, but these are still here. So we can zoom in over here and use our measurement tool and double click that, and it tells you that's 8 pixels, so that's why it's still hanging around. So if I go all the way out and I say make this 15 instead, consider white features, include the ones that are on the edge. If this was a calibrated magnification, you could reject in real units instead of just pixels. And now we've gotten rid of anything that's white and is under 15 pixels. And there's our final alpha lath segmentation, where you probably don't want those artifacts either, so maybe, again though, this is part of a 3D slice data set, so I don't worry about getting every slice perfect with the recipe. What I'm going to do is I would apply this recipe as it stands to every aligned slice in the batch processor, and then I would open up the full 3D segmented data in the 3D toolbox, and you could then get rid of any, say, white clusters that are only 1 or 2 slices thick. Instead of just looking at them on the basis of 2D area size, you're considering their 3D thickness, and it then should be obvious what small features should stay like this and what need to go like this. So that's one example of noisy data, I think, and the kind of segmentation we were able to get. Do we want to see another one of these examples I have queued up here, or move on to a different topic? I'm not going to necessarily treat the general overview. I think I kind of already did that. I wasn't going to, I have it second on my list, but I think that will the general overview has happened and will continue to happen just by showing all of the features. So do folks want to see another segmentation example here, or do you want to move on to something else? quantifying an already segmented image. Well, let's say that you had, so you're saying if your segmentation is binary, then we could open up that binary image and go after measuring the features. PCA analysis. Not directly. I mean, you can extract global measures. So, for example, if we have someone hands you an image like this and wants to know X number of variables about the features in here, all of those, since it's already a black and white image, you can directly take your measurements of the features. You can measure area fraction. You can get histograms of your things. If it was a colored segmented image, you could set up some steps that separate out the different colors into different into different layers, and then measure those features. But no PCA analysis or anything like that is directly available. Just for example, let's say I wanted to get someone handed this to me. I wanted to know the size of each of these features, and I wanted to visualize, what those look like. Well, I could go right into my color by measurements tool, which will be an option up here, and I could say generate equivalent diameters for every feature. And then when those are done, those will get loaded right in here to your spreadsheet. And if you click on a particular column, it's going to now use these measurements as the basis for coloring all of the features here. And we can adjust these limits if we want to. Let me actually go down here. So now every feature is colored according to its size. Yellow is high, blue is low. The feature selection will be sped up dramatically in Beta 7. Right now, the row that you select indicates it highlights that particular feature, and that's much, much slower than it needs to be because it's re-updating the coloring every time you select a row. But in Beta 7, that'll be much, much faster. So if you had other columns here of, say, aspect ratio or something else, if you clicked in that column, that's going to determine that, what gets used to color your features. Exporting those measurements, so to use that tool, you can either make the measurements file ahead of time as a text file like we just did, or like I did earlier, and then when you open up your color by measurements tool, instead of generate, you would click load. Since we just did generate, those were already exported. So we exported those as a text file right into here as diams. And then as soon as those were done exporting, they were automatically brought into the tool. But those are already in spreadsheet form right here. I'll show you another noisy example that I have, and I'll just load in the recipe that I used. Thanks very much to, I've forgotten I had that, Dinesh Lola for providing support, for providing this image. he did provide a link to the publication that this is part of, and I will try to post that later if anyone is interested. These are some sort of molecules that I think definitely meets the standard of a noisy image. And this recipe here went through and started again with a fine windowed adaptive threshold. And we ran some of cleanup steps, ran a watershed to try to separate some of these features, rejected smaller ones, put that away in memory, brought back the original, ran a standard deviation filter which brightened this region of interest, and then did some global thresholding on that to find that region of interest. A couple of erosion and dilation steps, flip it around, and now we have a rough outline of our area of interest, and we probably need to adjust these parameters here. So it's probably obvious that there's no one way to handle noisy images. It's going to depend on what kind of image you're working with and what steps you need to apply to deal with the noise. In this case, we went and we first found all of the small features that were in the image, and we put those aside in the companion image memory slot, and then we brought back the original and ended up finding just the area of interest, so that between the current image now, what you're looking at, and the one that's in memory, we're going to keep the lighter pixels. So that basically fuses and only keeps from the companion image those features that are inside the features in the current image. So that's how we've just kept the smaller features that were in the area of interest. If anyone is interested in any of the recipes that we use today, I think I should be able to provide them. I'll make sure I have the permission from the folks that we worked with, but I should be able to provide them. And I also want to say, I'm not sure if any of you saw on the home page, we are working hard to see if setting up what I will possibly end up calling a recipe store can become a reality. Would be a store only in the sense that you can go in and shop for recipes, but all the recipes, if we can help it, will always be completely free. So it'll basically be a recipe repository that you as MIPAR users can browse, download and use, and even add to. So we're trying to make it like an app store for recipes that's always free. And from the initial feedback I've gotten from folks, they would love to have something like that. So we're going to try to roll that out as soon as possible. This was another example that I had queued up for noisy images. I think you can already tell what it's going to look like. There's going to be an adaptive threshold step somewhere in there with a median filter first, and then some noise cleanup steps. Reject small features, smooth those out, watershed to separate connecting features, and then getting rid of. Usually we crop out the micron bar, but in this case I left it in, and we just get rid of eccentric features. And that did a pretty nice job of finding those spots, even though they look noisy to begin with. So that's another noisy image there. The rest that I have are kind of along those lines, so I think we can move on to another topic. I know we've got plenty of folks here with different needs. Johan had proposed, and sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you, Meg. Yes, MIPAR does support a wide array of input files. I think a couple of versions, we've always supported TIFFs and bitmaps and PNGs, JPEGs, all the usuals. A couple of versions ago, we added support for all of the bioimage formats. If you check, I think it's beta 4 or 5's release notes, there's a link to the bioimage formats open source website, and there's something like over 50 different formats that are in that category that we now support, including DM3 files, OIFs, LSMs. There was a bug, I think, in that version that actually prevented a lot of those from opening, but that got fixed in beta 6. So there should be a pretty stable opening of just about any image format you can think of in beta 6. I know Johan was one of the reporters of that bug, so let's see what he says if there's still issues opening those kind of files. I would say there are many cases, Camillo, where you don't need to use any pre-filtering, like Wiener or FFT high pass. I mean, in this case, I could erase out the median filter entirely, and we'll see what the recipe looks like. It's probably going to be fine. So it's just a little noisier than it was with the median in there, but our other noise cleanup steps should still be able to manage that noise. See, at the very end, now we end up still with a pretty nice particle segmentation, even without any pre-filtering. This adaptive threshold usually takes the brunt of the work. So it's really going to depend on your case whether you need any of that pre-processing. Johan, so we don't have the ability to burn on a scale marker right now. I know that's a pretty popular function of ImageJ, and I can add that to the list of things to add as a recipe function if you want the ability to burn on a scale bar. I think that would be a nice feature. So I'll put that on the list. Thank you. Usually folks have some sort of scale bar on the image coming in, which is how they're able to calibrate their magnification. So if you wanted to measure these features in microns instead of pixels, this image actually happens to have a scale bar. So a lot of times people end up cropping them off and then processing them. So yes, being able to put them right back on or add scale bars to images that didn't have nice ones off the microscope, it would be good to have that tool available. So I'll work on incorporating that. I'll show you here calibrating your magnification. So I've just zoomed in to where the known distance is, the scale bar in this case. And I'll perform step 1 where I add the line. And that's 0.5 microns. And now there's my calibration factor in microns per pixel. So now if I took measurements of all of my features, they would be in microns instead of pixels. And I haven't received too many comments on support for other units. I'm sure they're out there. Micron seems to have worked pretty well for just about everyone, but on the roadmap we do have adding support for using other display units instead of just microns all the time. So thanks for the suggestion, Johan. Meg asked, can you set a process window if you didn't want to crop off the scale bar before you analyze the images? So you're talking about setting up an area of interest on the image. Not exactly, but you can build in the crop at the beginning of the recipe. So if I went at the top and I just said crop the image here, add that to the top of the recipe, and I just want it to work in that area. And then double click the edge of the crop box when finished. Now you end up only processing that part of the image without needing to pre-crop all of your images in some other software. Okay, thank you, Kim, for that bug catch. I know that was an issue in one of the previous versions. I can try a test right now to see if that is the case still, that you can't run a batch if you cropped an image in a recipe. So right now, let me save this again as another test recipe. I will go take this image right here, and I'll just duplicate it a couple of times to make a fake batch. And now we'll go in here and we'll grab that recipe. It seems to be running okay. I do know, I think it was in beta 1 or 2, that you weren't able to run a batch with a crop step in there. Were you running it as part of a 3D data stack? Okay. As far as I can see, that is working okay, but if you encounter that, send a bug report or shoot me an email and point me to the exact setup that you were running, and I'll make sure that any problem that there is gets fixed. Jennifer, I wish there was a easier way to flag every one of software updates. We're working on that right now. The mechanism is for me to email folks and advise them of an update. Every time there is an update, I post it on the home page, but I also email everyone. And then you go to the update page, download the update, drag it into your install directory, and that's it. But yes, having a auto prompt when you start MIPAR would be a great feature, and we're doing everything we can to add that. Yes, there is OS X support. So MIPAR runs on Mac 10.9 and higher. I wish the version support was lower, but 10.9 and higher, thankfully, is a free update from Apple. So we support OS X Mavericks or 10.9 and up, and Windows 7 64-bit and up. Meg asked, could you bring back the scale bar, original image at the end that included the scale bar if you wanted to show? I see. So Johan's suggestion there is a great one. If you could just burn back the scale bar onto your image, that would be great. Right now, no, there's not a clear way to show the cropped or show the processed image overlaid on the uncropped image if you had a crop up top. But like I showed in the beginning, there can be easy ways of just avoiding segmenting your scale bar, usually just with 1 or 2 shape or size rejection steps. So in this case, we haven't cropped the scale bar, but it hasn't affected our segmentation. Okay. Yes, and you had sent me a couple of images, Meg, that I think could pertain to some of the other topics folks wanted to cover. The top 4, I still have region-specific thresholding from Johan that many voted on, and batch processing of different images. And I want to get to those. The 5th place was particle or grain size analysis, proposed by Jeff Fenton and voted on by several folks. And I know I get a lot of grain images and particle images that I want to cover. So let me just I'll show a grain image that Meg was kind enough to provide, and show the quick recipe for segmenting that, and hopefully deal with her scale bar on the bottom. Okay, so, well, those, okay, so the grain images we can't use, but I can show you another grain image later on if you're interested in segmenting grains and measuring, and that will tie nicely into the 7th place, which is measuring individual features, which we already somewhat showed, but Romulo wanted an easy way to automate the identification number of every feature. So what I'm doing now is just trying to find, here we go. Meg, I'm guessing this is what you mean by the scale bar on the bottom. Oh. Distinguishing different microstructural features was a common topic, so I definitely want to cover that as fully as needed. Here you have your solid white bar on the bottom. Got you. Yes, May, or Kim, absolutely. So when you go to crop an image, usually it's hard to know what the dimensions should be before you see them shown to you after a draw. So you can first choose to draw. And now the parameters for the crop are the dimensions of the crop box. So if you clicked on edit now you're editing the position of the crop box. Or you could enter those straight away, 00, 1291, 927. Enter dimensions, 0, 0, 1291, 927. And there you go. So that can help with making sure you're cropping the exact same area from different images if you've just memorized the dimensions somehow. Okay, so this is a bimodal titanium microstructure, so this ties in, I guess, to the 6th place topic, which was distinguishing different microstructural features. Here we have 2 different morphologies of titanium, or the alpha phase of titanium. So these are alpha laths. These are low temperature precipitate phase with the high temperature parent phase in between, and this is an optical micrograph, so this contrast is surface relief and based on etching. So we've got surface relief at the alpha beta boundaries, which is why you've got these dark lines separating the features. And then, so I think in industry these are typically called secondary alpha, and primary alpha are these larger, rounder precipitates. So this one I'll kind of do live. I haven't really played with this image. There's no prep work here. This is winging it. This is how winging it looks. We'll see how it goes. Let's try first without cropping the image and see if we can deal with the crop. I think there's, so no, I guess now that I think about it, Meg, although there isn't a button that you click to set an area of interest, we can kind of easily do that with some of the memory operations that we have available. For example, since your bars are always white, if I just set a global threshold value of 254, and then I go ahead and I reject, it's really just going to be probably anything under 100,000 pixels or 10,000. Get rid of that text, flip around this segmentation, or actually leave it like that. Now whatever segment, I can put this away in memory and bring back the original. Whatever segmentation I come up with, if I just do a keep lighter between that segmentation and the companion, it's going to erase basically any of my segmentation that sits in the micron bar. So that can be a nice way of, you know, setting up a process window, as you called it. I'd probably go with a adaptive threshold here. First off, I'll do my standard 30 and 100. I'm going to zoom in here and toggle my preview on and off. And with these features being so fine, especially from an optical image, if I took my distance tool here, I'm going to be looking at, you know, 30 pixels for a window size is probably a little too large here. I want to be down probably closer to the 5 to 10 range. And I can play with my percentage and drop that down a little bit. I don't need all that noise inside. I want to keep as much of these beta ribs as possible, so we can stand to have some noise in the interior. And how about we run one of our classic erosion steps, 6 and 10. And some of these features don't need to remain. So we can run our reject features. And this is probably no bigger than 5 pixels. 7 pixels. So we'll say get rid of anything 10 or less that are black. And now remember, features are black, so we're going to want to flip this around if we're trying to find the alpha phase. And again, if at the end, if I do a math, keep lighter pixels, which works again between the current image and the companion, you're going to get rid of everything in your micron bar. Okay, Johan, good question. And I wanted to show optimizing again here too, because obviously the settings that you pick are going to affect your apparent alpha volume fraction if that's what you're going with. So you want at least some way to defend why you chose what you did. So let's go back in the adaptive threshold. So adaptive, it's called adaptive because the every pixel gets assessed not relative to some global intensity value like global thresholding, where you pick a pixel value and anything under it gets made black regardless of what surrounds it. In this case, you're analyzing every pixel. So let's take this one. You would consider now a 10 pixel window, 10 by 10, around this one pixel. And if its intensity value is 96% or more of the average intensity window in that 10 by 10 area, of the average intensity value in that 10 by 10 window, if it's 96% or more of that average, it's going to be white. And if it's less, it's going to be black. So in this case, I guess it was less because it's black. So those are the two parameters for adaptive thresholding. What neighborhood around each pixel do you want to consider, and what percentage of that neighborhood's mean does the pixel need to be in order to be white or black? So what I'd probably do is just use the optimization tool here to maybe train this one segmentation so that I'm a little more comfortable in applying it to the rest of them, the rest of the images, since I would expect all these images to somewhat be of a similar feature scale. I just want to nail down what my window size and threshold value might need to be, and maybe even set them to optimize so that any variations one image to the next get accommodated. So let's go in here and say optimize the adaptive threshold. we'll use the, we won't do any of that FFT filtering right now. Let's see how this works without it. Prior image, we'll use a subregion, not a very small one if we're going to apply this to multiple images. If you have an optimization done using a subregion, it's going to use that same subregion in whatever image you're running it on. And if the subregion is very small, in another image it might not contain anything meaningful. So if you intend to batch apply an optimized step, you probably either want to use the entire image or a very large sub area that's sure to capture something of importance. So select a subregion and double click. And let's go from 10, let's actually go all the way down to 3 to 20. And sure, we can do steps of 1, 90 to 105. So again, now we are performing the adaptive threshold at each parameter combination in the range that we specified, and it's calculating the mutual information or the similarity between the segmented image, which is red, comparing the similarity between the segmented image and the comparison, which is, we asked for the prior image, which in this case is our original. Now, sometimes it is hard to optimize. We're really asking a lot of this. We're asking to optimize the threshold value across a bimodal microstructure. And it might make more sense to just zero in on the alpha laths, which I think it is going to make much more sense. See, here we have a case where we're always getting up against the high range of the window size. And I can tell you from experience, if I made the window size even higher, it's always going to be up against that edge. So let's try this instead. This will be much faster. We'll again optimize, but I'm just going to pick a small region of alpha laths right up here. And I'll set my same parameters here. And this will be orders of magnitude faster. It's still probably going to give me the same behavior, isn't it? So again, it's especially with optical images, you've got gradients at the boundaries of features. And remember, all that you're asking this tool to tell you is what's the best for by varying only the parameters of this one step. What's the best binary representation of this grayscale image? It doesn't know anything about what the microscope has done to the image. It's always going to be up to the experimenter to have an understanding of what the underlying microstructure is. And if you have a black dust particle in your image and your features are also black, optimization is going to probably want to select that dark dust particle as a feature, even though you know it shouldn't be there. So that is why sometimes we have to pre-process the image with things like FFT filtering to have the image better reflect what we know to be the underlying microstructure and discard some of the other confusing intensities. So I'm going to show that again here. We have a call original image already set up. So right here below the set companion, I'm going to add actually, we need to call the I'm bringing back the original image here so that I can run a high pass on it. And I usually always end up using 20 as a sigma value for the high pass. Now I make this my restore image 1. And now I've brought back the original. And I go into adaptive thresholding. And I edit the optimization. And I pick restore image 1. And with the same ranges. Now let's see what it comes back with for and we're still up against the edge of that range, aren't we? Let's try extending that a little bit further and see if that is where we want to be. I don't think that it is. So you're definitely seeing this tool run in a raw environment here. It doesn't always work exactly how you would hope. Let's go from 20 to 40 here. We'll make this a core step size so it doesn't take very long. Why not 60? Okay, and I think we have reached a peak here finally, up at 35. Now whether you believe this is another question. You look at what it was using for comparison. I don't personally feel like that is the best segmentation of these alpha laths. So what I can do in this case is use my judgment to pick the window size, since that's usually easier to decide as a human being, because it almost always goes on the scale of your features. And I'll pick that window size to be fixed, and then I'll let the threshold value vary, because that threshold value can really influence, as you probably all know, what your perceived volume fraction of a phase is. So what I would do is say, let me unoptimize my step so I can go in and explore the window size. Like I showed before, our fine feature scale here is on the order of probably about between 5 to 10. So if I use 7, split the difference. I'm going to go with 7 as the window size, because that's giving me what I think are reasonable results from the window size. And now I'm going to optimize it, and I'll use a subregion. And that subregion will be somewhere up in here. I'm going to keep these untouched, and I'm just going to let the threshold value vary. And you can even go over a really fine step size here, since you're only varying one parameter. And now instead of a surface, you're going to get just a regular 2D plot here that is threshold value versus mutual information. And we're picking that 94.5 as the maximum value. So now we've used the software to help us decide what that threshold value should be and put our brain in charge of coming up with the window size. So there's our alpha segmentation. If you want an area fraction, 74%. Now in this case, I think the point of this example was really to show finding different microstructural features. Let's say you wanted to separate the areas of secondary alpha from the primary alpha. This microstructure is going to make it pretty easy because there's a disparity, a heavy disparity in size between these two modes. What I would do is above this keep lighter steps, since we'll keep this at the very end of the recipe. So above that step, we will put in an erosion step here, since that will quickly eat away. 3 should be all that's necessary. We're going to have some residual pieces of laths. I'm not sure why we're having an issue there with the zoom. I'll make sure that isn't a bug. The zoom should stay as you have it set. Some of these pieces that remain after the erosion need to go away. So after the erosion, we'll add a reject feature step, and we'll get rid of, probably that's the biggest feature we want to keep, so 48. So we'll set 40 pixels. And again, if you always have a calibration factor, if your recipe, because calibration factors, if they're present when the recipe is saved, they get saved into the recipe. So if you always make sure to have calibrated recipes, then you can reject these features on the basis of microns instead of pixels. So if your magnification changes, hopefully the recipe still works okay. So we've rejected small features, and then we'll redilate everything back by 3. And now you end up just keeping your primary alpha, and it works pretty well. You got an error here where the laths were almost completely unresolvable, so it's picking that up as an equiaxed alpha particle. In my opinion, that's not going to affect your statistics in any meaningful way. You can always, since you're probably going to review the output of every segmentation in the processed image editor, you could very quickly delete that feature using the select and erase tools. If you wanted to say now set up layers so that you had one layer as your primary, one as your secondary, I would go to this step where we've erased the influence of the micron bar and just invert the segmentation. But now we probably want to do keep lighter again, so that again the micron bar isn't considered in the, so here is our step where we found the secondary alpha. It looks the same in outline view. Let me show it to you in labels view with a opacity setting. So there's our secondary alpha. And there's our primary alpha, colored according to separate features. Yeah, sorry about the zooming. I'm not sure what's going on there. That obviously needs to be fixed. So, like I said, the layers button is now going to be down here in beta 7. But if you wanted to, say, make an area fraction measurement, even though you don't really need to have the primary and secondary as separate layers if you're just measuring area fraction, because the area fraction of one is going to be 100 or 1 minus the other, if you want to use percentages or not. But if you were measuring some other metric, like size of all of the features in each of the layers, you might want to assign those steps as different layers. So I would go and I would say, take my keep lighter pixels, add that as a layer, and call this primary, and now take this selection. So whatever step you've selected, the selected features are shown down here in your selection window. So I want this selection, which is all of my secondary. Add that as a green layer and label that secondary. And you can look at this as, I mean, an outline won't be very helpful because you've got the two layers are next to each other. But an overlay is a nice way of showing that. You can save this image, save those layers. So now those two steps get starred because they're flagged as important. This is your primary alpha layer. That's your secondary alpha layer. So if you batch ran this recipe now on 10 different images, you'd get binary outputs for every layer that's in the recipe for every image. I can show you what that looks like. Since I know batch processing multiple images was also a topic, let me unoptimize the adaptive threshold for now, and we'll save this recipe here as let's call it find alpha for now. So I will launch the batch processor. That'll bring in my recipe. I will save the data here. You can choose to append a suffix or not, or change the name of the suffix that goes at the end of every processed image. Clear these out, and Meg was kind enough to provide a few TIFF images here, so we can try to run this batch on each of those and cross our fingers. Let's see how it goes. So that's it. Recipe, where to save, images. We've got 2 layers set in the recipe. Go to work. And now review the processed images. We already have it open, so we'll say yes, we want to clear what's there. And this, of course, brings up Johan's bug that he found, where having layers set, I guess, when images are being brought in, can throw an error. We'll make sure that's fixed in beta 7. Also, changing your opacity to 100 in layers view in the processed image editor causes a crash, so we're very sorry for that, and that will definitely get fixed. I think it's already been fixed, and we'll get beta 7 out as soon as we can. But so here, okay, so we've just, in case you missed that, once the batch is done, review processed images. And what's brought in are primary and secondary segmentations. We can look at this as a, we can look at the layers here. Just make sure not to set 100 for the opacity. 30 will make it a little bit clearer. So we have primary and secondary for, now what's actually been saved, if you go look at your Windows Explorer, in here we have a processed folder, and I forgot I actually kept measurements at the end of that recipe, so we also got measurements out of the batch process. We have a processed folder, since that was the suffix we used, and inside of this folder we have primary and secondary for image 1, primary and secondary for image 2, and that definitely doesn't look like it did a very good job, does it? First one's okay, the second one is not, third one is terrible. We can probably verify that through here. If we flip through these images, let's see what we have here. That one's not too bad. I think if we just throw a, if we keep that set at, yes, and thank you Meg for giving me an out and saying why it might not work well. I'm determined to make it work well, and I'm sure it will, so let's just try to optimize that adaptive threshold step and see how it goes. So that one's acceptable. That one is obviously unacceptable, and that one is also probably not one that you'd want to quantify. So the first one works well. The rest do not. So let's go back. Now, if you do have one particular image that's bad, but the rest are okay, sometimes I will go and I will take that image. What does this one look like? Oh, that one was reasonable. Let's take this one that was awful. And you can just open that reference image, and that will open it directly into the image processor for you. And let me reload the recipe that we ran. So let's see where we went wrong. That's all fine. That's just setting up that adaptive threshold is the problem. So what we'd like to have happen is for this to be Johan, not necessarily. I mean, with images being at different magnifications could cause your recipe to perform with varying degrees of success. But if you have steps in there, like you're rejecting features based on microns, or your recipe for whatever reason isn't sensitive to magnification, then there's no problem. Other than that, all of those images would have different calibration factors. And right now, the processed image editor supports a single calibration factor for the images that are loaded. So I have batch processed different magnifications and reviewed them all at the same time. I will usually then just generate my measurements in pixels, and then in Excel have a column of calibration factors that are different for each image, and do my pixels to micron converting in Excel. Just multiply your pixel measurements times your calibration factor, and in that way you can accommodate different scale factors for each image. But you raise a good point, which is that allowing each image to have a different calibration factor, perhaps this value changes. So if the calibration factor could be stored as a tag into the image, that could make things easier for some folks. So we'll put that on the list. And everyone, please feel free to use the request feature page from the support drop-down. A few of you have posted there, and the more that post, the more things will get added. There's a voting option on those feature requests, so check out that list from time to time and vote on the ones that you want to see get added. Let's go back to this here, and what I would probably have wanted my percentage to be was somewhere up in this. I mean, this is going to be a very challenging image altogether in that the lats are not necessarily that resolvable, but we still should be able to do a better job than we did. So if I optimize this step, and I'll use a big subregion, and we'll fix the window size at 7 like we did last time, and we'll let the threshold value vary in this range. And let me try using our high pass filter as the comparison. Whoops. And finally, let me try out using the intraclass variance metric instead of mutual information, where in this case you're looking for a minima in intraclass variance, which gave us even worse results. So I think an image like this might need a different recipe to segment secondary from primary, and I have an idea of what that should be. If there's no strong alpha-beta contrast inherently in the secondary areas, then I think we'll probably throw a standard deviation filter in there. I don't think you'd be confident in measuring lath thickness from this image anyway, so you're probably just after a primary volume fraction if I'm guessing. So I can quickly show how to make a recipe to deal with this type of microstructure. The other ones I think should all be should perform better than they did in the first batch. So let me open up the other image that you provided, or one of the other images, because I believe this one, even though it does have nicely defined alpha and beta ribs, 25,660, it still didn't perform as well as it could have. So let's make it better. If we look at our step here, zoom out so I can set my our subregion, fix the window size, vary the threshold value. .96, which is a slight change from what it was. And I, of course, forgot to do that again. So I just changed it to use the FFT filtered version. Still 96. Well, that's good. So I'm going to now save this as a new recipe, which is find alpha optimized. And we'll go back into the batch processor. You don't have to worry about changing any names or anything. The batch processor will look at the directory that you said to save to, and if there's already a processed folder, it'll call the next one processed 01. So you'll never overwrite any previous results in case you need them again. Let me load in the optimized recipe. So you see now that step has 2 asterisks, since that optimization loop is going to be performed on every image. And we'll just let that run again. So it's going to pause there for a second while it does the loop. It doesn't take very long. And again, this is allowing every image to have a slightly different threshold value. Sometimes you don't need to do this. Sometimes you can add a auto levels adjustment at the top of your recipe that basically normalizes the contrast. So for some microstructures, that can avoid the need to have these flexible steps if you take care of the variations before they even have a chance to influence your thresholding. That would just look like going up to the top here and say pre-processing adjust contrast at the very top, auto, which sets your sliders to the base of the histogram, and say accept. Now you'd have to change this a little bit. You wouldn't want to call the original image in this case, because that's your unadjusted image. You'd want to, below here, set a restore image 2, and I have had requests to add additional memory slots, image 3 and 4 and 5, and I think we're going to do that. So that should also make it into the next 1 or 2 releases. And then you would call restore image 2 instead of the original image in this case. So that's an example of how you can deal with slight or image-to-image variations. But let's go back into our hopefully we won't run into that same bug again. So our batch has been done. Let's bring in the results here. So we have our primary and secondary for image 1. That looks a lot better for image 2. Image 3 we knew wasn't going to work very well, and image 4 also would probably be challenging to get a lath thickness measure of. So you could sort your images into ones with strong contrast, strong alpha beta contrast that you intend to measure lath thickness from, and others with weaker contrast. These weaker ones, if you're just after primary secondary fraction, or if, I hope this applies to enough people in this webinar, this can be an example, and I think it would work for some of the other examples that were submitted. We had some images from weld cross sections with different phases in steel, and I can build a recipe here for what I think should work for those steel images and try to apply it there. Let's start with the first alpha that we built. Well, I'll start fresh actually, just so we can see the whole process. So here we have this image. I think if I just ran, again, we have our, if we want to keep the micron bar and don't want to crop it, we have these preliminary steps. And now off of this, I'll do a standard deviation filter, maybe with a window size of 5. So that's not working quite as well as I had expected. We could have This is a great live example. Thank you, Meg. We could try some noise cleanup here and some on the other end. Want to try to avoid adding that artificial cluster. So now let's get rid of these black features there that don't belong and flip this around. see how we're doing. So we could just try to get rid of small features, and that might eliminate. Thing is, there are going to be some small features like this guy that we want to keep. So what we can do is kind of apply two different metrics to the filter. If I take, in this case I'm going to need my companion image, so I want to set up this one with the micron bar suppressor basically as the restore image instead of the companion. And now I've got my segmentation that needs a little bit of cleaning. And I know that any large features want to stay. Those are obviously primary alpha. So I'm just going to consider for removal ones that are, let's see what those that are under 300 look like. So keep features less than 300 pixels. So we'll say these will be candidates for removal. So off of this guy, we'll do another reject features, and on the basis of eccentricity, we say this is a small one we want to keep, but this is a small one we want to get rid of. The red one is 0.73, which is much closer to a circle. A circle would be 0. 0.97 are going to be your very eccentric features. So I would say we can confidently say anything less than 0.95 we don't want to remove. And what I forgot to do is come up here and set this as the companion, because we're going to merge this image with what you'll see in a minute. So we've set this as our companion. We've gone and we've removed small features. We've now only kept the eccentric ones, and now we're going to flip that around, and between this image and the companion keep the lighter features, which is going to erase out the ones that we've preserved from our two filters. So math, keep lighter. Now we've erased out the eccentric features from this image, the eccentric small features from this image. Johan asks the situations where we'd use neighborhood conditionals. I don't use those very often, so I hope they are as bug-free as possible. Those would be cases where you have, say, many small features, but you only want to reject the ones that are surrounded by many other small features, or vice versa. If you have, for instance, if off of this image we only wanted to keep these clusters of small features, we wanted to get rid of stray ones that are out here for whatever reason. Sometimes we have microstructures with one type of precipitate, which are small features that are all clustered together, and then we have glancing cross sections through other precipitates that are just the same size as the smaller ones that we want to keep. We want to get rid of those glancing cuts, and we know they're glancing cuts because they don't have a lot of other small features around them. So if off of this reject feature step I went in and say I want to keep everything under 300, but only if in a say 100 pixel radius, there are greater than 5 other features. And you can see what those conditionals are for different features. So with these parameters set, if I'm measuring area of this one and this one, not only do I get the area like I did before, but I also get a neighborhood conditional value for what I have set. So the orange only has one other feature in its 100 pixel radius, whereas the red has 12. So even though both are we'll need to revisit and make sure that that works properly for the keep less than or equal to mode. I know for sure that it works properly for the reject less than. What we've done now is we said reject those features that are under 300, which should be everything, because remember the step above we said keep everything under 300. So without any neighborhood conditionals, we'd be rejecting everything in the image. But with neighborhood conditionals, we're saying consider everything under 300 as candidates for rejection, but only actually remove them if they are surrounded by, in this case, we'd go less than or equal to 5 features. So now only the small features that aren't surrounded by very many get removed. And you can, of course, use all kinds of different variables. So, you know, let your imagination run and see how these can help you. If 5 nearest neighbors have a total area of under this value, there are all kinds of different operations that you can achieve with neighborhood conditionals like that. Hopefully that was helpful. So we're moving on. We've got rid of the reject. We've got rid of the eccentric features, and now what's left is we know that very, very small features obviously are going to go away. So there's no way that's an equiaxed alpha particle. So I can probably confidently say anything under 25 can get tossed away. And maybe we can even go a little stronger with that. Probably the smallest equiaxed alpha we'd like to remain is that. So anything under 100, let's do away with. And now lastly, here's another area where optimization could help. You can tell that we're kind of under in all of our segmentation, and this can drastically affect your area fraction. So measure it now and you get 18% primary alpha. Dilate all of your particles by a couple of pixels. That could be right. Now we get 22%. Maybe dilate them one more. Could also be right. Now we get 25%. So if someone tells you what the area fraction should be ahead of time, you can probably pick the parameters to make it so. What we'd rather do is have a more objective way, so we can optimize this dilation step at the very end. We can use the entire image, compare it to the original, and say let our dilation vary from 0 to 10 in steps of 1. And this is kind of like a way to snap your segmentation at the very end to make sure that your now that's somewhat surprising. You know, I wouldn't necessarily thought that, but because you have this gradient around the edge, that's what it's wanting to be your segmentation. Remember, we do also have this micron bar interfering with things, so very good point, Johan. That just occurred to me as well. Let's make sure that we take our image here at the end and set it as the companion, and then restore the, remember we set our restore image number 1 to be our mask here, and then do a keep lighter. So now we make sure that we're only dilating the features. Let's try that again. There we go. Nope. We can see what it looks like with the intra-class variance. Also 0. So it's not necessarily what I thought would have been the optimum segmentation, but because you have this gradient here, now if you know that there's really that's never going to fly, that although this gradient is here, you know because of etching that the boundary really should be further out. We could say that we know the dilation at least needs to be a couple of pixels to get it closer to the edge. We're just not sure if we want it to be drawn here or 3 pixels later. We could just restrict our optimization window from 2 to 10. And now we're going to put our optimum depth at 6. Which is right outside of the gradient now instead of just inside. So you sometimes have to decide whether you want to defend your segmentation based on your experience, where I probably would have chosen a depth of 4, or whether you want to just let the numbers do the talking and defend them for that reason. Gradients at the boundaries of features can be a nightmare when it comes to deciding parameters. The nice thing about using recipes, though, is that whatever rules you do decide on get applied to every image. So no segmentation is ever going to be perfect. We don't even know what that means half the time, because again, your image is a convolution of the microstructure with the microscope, so it requires some interpretation inherently. But setting up these recipes and rules for defining where boundaries are hopefully leads to a systematic error if there is an error. And once you have these recipes built, feel free to put them in a library, send them around to folks at your place of work or company that use them, and the hard part is really done once the recipes are made. Again, we are working hard to get that recipe store up and running, which I think will be an incredible resource for many folks. Some of these bits here are probably the last thing we need to address. For example, this small glob got erased and we'd like to keep it. So if we just go with 75 instead of 100, that should add back some of those smaller features. So this is a recipe that I'd probably feel more comfortable using when your alpha beta boundaries aren't clearly defined, and you'd use the other recipe for the subset of images where they are clearly defined. Okay, I've spent a fair bit of time on that, but I think that can cover some of the distinguishing different microstructural features. Is there anyone out there that had particular images for distinguishing different microstructural features that they were really hoping would be demonstrated? I have Kim and Rasul down for distinguishing different microstructural features. Kim, I know, is still with us. I don't believe Rasul is, so that is the way it is, I guess. So if Kim has something in particular. Okay. Well, I'm always here to mess around and make a recipe, and send it off to you. That's no problem, at least to get you started. If I check my catalog here and see what else I had in the queue for distinguishing microstructural features, this is a nice example that I can just show quickly. These features are all the same intensity level, but they wanted the rods separated from the dots. So what we ended up doing is this deal. Oh my goodness, 36 steps. Wouldn't have thought. Hello? Pardon me for a second, folks. Who's speaking? My apologies. I wasn't sure if the phone ringing was someone calling in. What did you say, sir? Oh, the binary images should be, yeah, 1-bit images. Yeah. So, yeah, here we had, again, our trusty adaptive threshold, some cleanup steps. We rejected on the basis, in this case, of what I did here is we took our, this can be a handy feature, we took our grayscale image and we set that up as the companion. We ran the adaptive on that, we inverted, we rejected small black features, but then then we went and we said that we know that any remaining black features that have dark intensity underneath them are not in any way going to be features of interest. So we went in here to reject features, and you see these few steps here have asterisks next to them, which is the conventional marker, like in the menus, for requires a companion image. So these parameters will use the companion image to measure the intensity underneath each feature. So if I go over here and I, with this measure selected, I measure this one and this one, it'll come back and tell me the red one has a much darker gray value on average underneath it than the orange one. So setting 100 to be our threshold for underlying intensity did a nice job of getting rid of the rest of the artifacts. And we rejected some white in between. Did a watershed to separate the features, put this in memory, rejected round features, kept features that were on the boundary of being round or eccentric, since some of those could be adjoining round features that just didn't get connected. Ignored edge features for the purpose of this filter, separated those adjoining round features, put that in a memory slot, put that in another memory slot, brought back the state of the segmentation up here before we did that adjoining feature separation. So we brought it back here, kept the features that were the same between this state and the companion state, which are our separated adjoining features. Erased out those features that got separated, and then added them back from the state where they were separated. And I am working to fix this snapping issue of the list box here were very long recipes. Every step that you click, you get set back to the bottom. It's not the friendliest, I know. And then we had other deals where now we end up, after all the features get separated, we reject out any of the eccentric ones. We do some more noise cleaning. We erase these out of a previous state. We smooth everything up and then get rid of last remaining noise. And we've set up 2 layers here. So this is our layer of rods, and this is our layer of round features. And this worked out pretty well for this user. It's an extensive recipe. It's got a lot of arithmetic back and forth between layers, but set aside a few minutes for yourself to think through the arithmetic, and hopefully once you have it, this will work okay on different images. So there are different types of microstructure feature segmentation. All the features have the same intensity and they just differ on shape. The one example we just saw, you've got different intensity and feature scale in the different areas in Meg's titanium images, so you need some different steps to split out the different features that way. And I'll just show one final example. I won't go into detail. This gentleman was nice enough, Zubair from Pakistan. Thank you very much for providing this image. He wanted these noisy clusters separated from these darker stringers that were along the grain boundaries. And here's another case where you just have to consider what makes the features different and pick steps to go after that. So this was one layer here and another layer that had these stringers here along the boundaries. Or these strange clusters. To be honest, I'm not used to seeing this mess here along the bottom. You could end up just at the very top or prior to this adaptive threshold step. You might want a background flattening step that gets rid of this subtle gradient from top to bottom. Flatten background, you usually end up, and that's there. We've just run into that problem where you set the slider towards the middle since that's intuitive, but that ends up in some cases locking it up because a 5,000 sigma background flattening is very resource intensive. So I apologize for that, and I will fix those slider ranges in beta 7. Let's bring MIPAR back up and move on to one of the next topics. Yes. Oh, yes, sir. Sure. So the in your case, all of the updates don't require that installation process be redone. The update will you'll just be downloading a single executable file from the website. So you could download that on an online computer, take that file over to the computer on some media, and you just drag that file into your install directory and choose overwrite. So there's none of that installation process that you went through the first time. Once you do that, you shouldn't have to do it again. No. Correct. Yeah. Right. No, it's just I think it's like a 60 megabyte file that you download from the site. and there are some instruction items on the update page to tell you where to drag the file. It's here, so it's at MIPAR US and update. And you would, once beta 7 is out, if you're on Windows, you would download beta 7. It's just going to be this zip file here. Then if you go to where MIPAR is installed, the application directory, go ahead and take your download file, which is here in downloads, 3, 2, 1. And inside of the zip folder is MIPAR. And just drag it in there, copy and replace, and you're done. Hopefully it's pretty painless. The folks that are still with us, we've covered, we did not get to, Johan, you had proposed region-specific thresholding. Was that in relation to the oxide layers that I assisted you with, or did you have another example of that? We'll wait for Johan's response. Okay, thank you very much. The batch processing of different images we kind of just looked at with Meg's data. You know, different is obviously a varying term, so there may not always be a single recipe. Despite the flexibility of steps, you might have to partition your data into 2 or 3 recipes. You can bring all of it together in the processed image editor. So if you ran one recipe on one set of images and another on a second set, you know, you would take the first output install packs. Let's say we took, you know, imagine these are 2 sets from two different recipes. I don't know what's going on here with my selection. So you would load in the output from one set, and then you would add to these, and you would load in the output from a second recipe. And then you would pick all of the grayscale images, or all of the reference images that just got processed. So you'd have six of those, and then you could generate all of your measurements at once, global or feature by feature, even though you use 2 different recipes to get them. So I think we've, Matt, you had asked for the batch processing of different images. Let me check if you are. Okay. Was there a particular case that was struggling? Okay. Thank you. Good to know. We also have particle or grain size analysis, which I think might have even been tied with topic number 4. So for grain size analysis, I know Meg and her team are working with grain images, as many of you are. Jennifer, you had sent me an image. Thank you very much. Let me see, is Jennifer still with us? I don't believe she is, unfortunately. She probably had another obligation. Sorry I didn't get to her image while she was here. It was not necessarily a grain image, but we have it here under under particle grain size analysis. And I imagine she wanted these dendrites identified. So these are fairly bright, so this is likely going to be, now you do have this edge to deal with here, so I don't know if there's anyone that's working with images where you have a non-rectangular region of interest that you want to isolate without having to crop the image. This would be a similar operation to what we did with Meg's image, where we basically set up a mask by, excuse me, that's quite embarrassing. I don't know what prompted that music to start, but we get a little soundtrack for the webinar. So here we have, you could pick a threshold value that helps find your mask. Now we need to do a little bit of cleanup here, of course. And I mean, you may at least want to crop off the micron bar here, since it's really not one that you'd probably want to put on any publishable figure anyway. But just for the spirit of avoiding that, and you may even want to go get rid of this thing in here. And let's ignore getting rid of features that touch the edge. Oh, and that actually doesn't touch the edge. Okay, well, there's no sense in making our life extra difficult over the micron bar. So I'll just show cropping out the micron bar, but not cropping the rest of your image, and still working with a non-rectangular area of interest. So here we've done that. We can get rid of those guys there. So now if we flip this around, this is going to be our area of interest that we work with. So I can set this up again as our companion and bring back our original. Sorry, my system is starting to lag a little bit more. Okay, I'm back. I just paused the screen recording because I just had taken a 2.5-hour screen capture, and I wanted to make sure I dumped that to the disk before I lost it. Okay, so we've gone back, and probably just a oh, that's because we've recalled a original image here that is uncropped. So what I want to do is set up a restore image after the crop if you intend to build it into one. No problem, Kim. Thank you so much for attending. Hope it was helpful. We'll do another one at some point now that we've got the system down a little bit better, and send me any images that you need help with. But thanks for sticking with us so late. Enjoy Copenhagen. I'm sure it's better than Ohio, where I am right now. We're going to go into now. Well, we can use a mask directly if we wanted to go after these features with an adaptive threshold, since that's likely going to work fine for us. So not set restore. Call restore image 1 here. we can go in to our adaptive threshold, and you see if I set, I don't know what window size I want to use, maybe 100. If I do that, your pixels along the edge here are tougher to get because you've got this black boundary that's very close to them, or this black area. So if I use a mask, if I use my companion image as my mask, I'm only going to be considering the pixels that fall inside of the black features in the mask, and that will do a much nicer job along. And let's take the percentage up a little bit, 105. And we may want to go with a slightly bigger window size so that we get some of these features found in here. This we may have also wanted to actually include in the mask, since that's causing some confusion around its area as well. So it would look something like, nice thing about these non-destructive recipes is that you can always go back up here and change this so that you do include that feature. So now that gets excluded from our adaptive threshold, and we can clean up some of these stray pixels around here, and then clean up some of the white stray pixels with classic dilation step. We'll include this in our measuring individual features portion if that interests folks. Things that are under 200 pixels, maybe 150, that are white, don't need to be long. Now again, features are black, so we're going to flip that around, but we also need to do now a keep lighter between this and the companion, so that in our final segmentation we don't have the black background. And again, we might need to do a final black rejection step to get rid of things that weren't perfectly erased by our mask. So there we have only targeted features inside this non-rectangular area of interest without having to crop the image ahead of time. And there are features. Now if you want to take the measurement of a couple of features that I know Romulo and some other folks are doing, you can just use this interactive measure tool. Depending on the number of features in your image, there can be a little bit of initialization overhead, but like I think I mentioned in one of the earlier tutorials, we're really working on speeding up that tool and hope to have that out soon. But if you picked a couple of features that you wanted to measure for whatever reason, click on them and hit enter. Now you get this. Now Romulo has nicely pointed out that this is a bit frustrating, that if you measure really more than 2 features at once, you get a feature measurements window that does not scroll. I apologize for not fixing this in Beta 6. Beta 7 will certainly include this scrollable window. We're working on redoing the interactive measurements interface altogether to let you basically get a table of the measurements you made and be able to click on rows and columns in the table and have features highlighted interactively. But at the very least, this window will be scrollable. If you just limit your selection to 2 features at a time, which is usually what we always use that tool for, is to compare one feature to another, then you won't have that issue with the measurements being off the window. But we'll fix that and make it scrollable. If you want to measure more than 1 feature, like we showed before, and I think Romulo, if you're still with us, this This will maybe help with the automating ID. I'm not sure if it does automating ID for individual features. Let me know if this isn't quite what you had in mind. Johan, will it include the, how would you do an area measurement on this image for the current black features? I see. If you want to do an area fraction, say, of the black features, but only consider their area as a subset of the area of interest, I take it that's what you mean, Johan, so that you're not considering their area fraction. Okay. Yeah, so there's not a one-click solution to do that, but what I'd recommend is if you're doing this on a bunch of images, go ahead and set up your layers. So we're going to pick this one here to be our features, and we'll call these dendrites, and then go back up to where you have your mask set in the set companion step, and we'll call this to be the area of interest. I'm actually going to move this here up to the top so that it's underneath the red features. So now you've got area of interest and dendrites. So now if you add a measurement to your recipe, this is measuring the total black number of pixels in this particular image here. But the nice thing about layers is that when you run this recipe on a batch, you'll get all of these measurements for each layer. So you'll get an area count for the dendrites and an area number for the area of interest, and your area fraction then of course would be the first divided by the second. So that's how I would recommend measuring area fractions from subsets of features in the image. So you know, you have 3.1 million pixels that you're considering, and 1.2 million of those belong to features, so 1.2 over 3.1 gives you your area fraction. Now if you wanted to do individual features like we already touched on, you could measure them. If you just wanted the spreadsheet, check off the ones you want for each feature here. If you did that and then ended up wanting to visualize those, so let's say we were after maybe the area of every dendrite in this image. You'll get a tab delimited spreadsheet here with the area for every feature. And I think Romulo may have been referring to wanting to easily determine, when we look at the spreadsheet that comes out here from particle grain size analysis. So you've got feature 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, what are features 1, 2, 3, 4? I mean, what we're working on adding is, when you're in labels view, having a box that you can check that says show IDs or something, where you'd get a number added on top of every single feature. That's still not necessarily the most helpful way to find feature number 227. You don't want to hunt through all those numbers in the image to find where that is. So this is where you'd use your color by measurements tool. And you have your features here in your spreadsheet that was just generated. So we would just load in those areas and say I want to use the area column to measure my features, and let that complete. And now, like I said, right now the feature highlighting is much slower than I want. But we're going to fix that. So if you wanted to know right now what is feature number 117, you would, in the area column, click on that row, and feature 117 gets highlighted there. And you can show or hide that for the purpose of saving the image if you want. You can also choose to color according to feature number instead of area number, and this is going to give you a nice gradient here in a second of a color map where the features are colored according to their feature number, but it wouldn't be very easy for you to pick out what is feature number 117 from this color map alone, which is why we have the feature get highlighted if you want. Romulo, does that answer the kind of the automating the ID of measured features? Okay, great. Thanks very much. But I appreciate your suggestion of putting numbers on top of the features, because in the cases where you just have, say, 15 features in the image, it might be helpful to see them labeled with their number automatically. I'd be remiss if I didn't show at least one grain segmentation example. So here is one that I won't show those. Here is one. Oh, no, this is what we just opened. I'm sorry. We have these guys here. And this is what I started with in the very beginning. So I'll load in the recipe that we used for this. This was probably guess it, an adaptive threshold to roughly start to find the boundaries. So we set up a nice fine window to zero in and just kind of straddle these boundaries. We did 20 pixels, and then we adjusted our percentage to try to maximize the number of boundaries that were connected, but minimize the amount of interior noise that we produce. And we settled in on something like that. And now we go and we get rid of, with a fairly weak amount of erosion, a 6 and 10 classic erosion, dilate the boundaries so that they connect in places where they were missed, but not so much that we join noise particles to the boundaries of the grains. Get rid of some of those smaller ones. You're going to lose a few boundary segments here, but it's not so bad that water shedding can't come in and fix those. Then we shrink the boundaries back down, we invert, we get rid of remaining noise features that won't completely destroy our segmentation, and now we run our fairly powerful water shedding algorithm. This image was the basis of the new water shedding tutorial that's going up as soon as that technical difficulty gets fixed by our website provider. What this is doing roughly is it's considering a distance map of your binary image where every black pixel gets labeled according to the distance to the nearest white pixel. If you want to see what that looks like real quickly, can't promise that it won't throw an error here, but oh, it's fine. Okay, so this is the distance map here. If I scale up the contrast so you can see it, so your binary image turns into this in the background. So you get very intense values that indicate these pixels are furthest from the nearest white pixel. So you get these. Now if you imagine this distance map as a topography map, so you basically invert the distance map so that high distance values are deep valleys in your topography map. So you've got a pit here, a pit here, a pit here, and you then run a rainfall simulation on this imaginary topography. These basins will fill with water until the water levels impinge on each other, and those impingement boundaries are called watershed lines from geography terms, I suppose, and those lines of impingement then get traced in onto your image to help separate the features. So we can get rid of the distance map. We don't need that. So that's what the watershed is doing, is it's running that rainfall simulation on your distance map. And this weakness value is suppressing minima in that distance map that fall below a certain threshold. So if the distance map only dips 2 pixels into the page, it's going to flatten that out so that it doesn't contribute to the watershed separation. And that's how we can control the strength of the watershed algorithm. So we start with this and we end up with this. And this weakness value setting is usually never going to be any higher than 50. At very high values, it can start to do some really funky things. For separating binary features that are touching each other, I'm almost always at 5 or less. The watershed can be run directly on grayscale images, and it treats then the grayscale image as the topography map, where bright pixels are up to sea level and dark pixels are down as valleys. Usually when you're running on grayscale images, your weakness values get up near 10 to 30 to give you reasonable results. And we settled in on 2.5 in this case. So the lower the weakness, the stronger the algorithm. As you go to higher and higher weakness settings, you're going to tend to draw fewer and fewer lines in the segmentation. And then your thickness value affects the thickness of the lines that get drawn. So we have a rough grain segmentation, but we've got some messiness here. The boundaries aren't a consistent thickness, and we want them to be. So what we do is we put this away as the companion, and we bring back the original. We do a filter on it to make our boundaries bright, a standard deviation filter to brighten the boundaries. And then we use a marker-based watershed. So here we run a watershed on the original image, and we superimpose markers from the companion image. So before this latest step is run, this is what you get. You use what's in the companion image as markers, and you then watershed using. What the markers do is they force all of the grayscale pixels that fall under each feature to be minima in the image, regardless of what their grayscale values are. So every pixel that falls inside of a marker gets forced to be part of a valley. So your peaks in the image are just going to be what's outside of the markers in between here. And when you then run the watershed on that marker adjusted image, what it effectively does is dilate all of your markers until they impinge on one another and give you much nicer grain boundaries. So with a low weakness value, if you run that, that's what it ends up doing. It turns that into that. Yes, in effect, that is what you're doing. Sometimes I prefer this to skeletonizing if the boundaries that you have are fairly thick, since skeletonizing can give you these weird little side branches that can be hard to get rid of. We can see what that looks like in this case so if you take this image and you invert it and we skeletonize that image, it doesn't work too bad, but you do have some funky things like that. So I've usually found that, yeah, marker-based watershedding can give you a cleaner end result. Now you can also skeletonize this end result, since this isn't, I mean, skeletonization is done with some mathematics I don't quite understand that is preserving Euler numbers and so on. So you can skeletonize this final boundary map if you wanted to, and it would give you something that is slightly different. What I've actually done for a fellow recently is there wasn't a one-click way in MIPAR to measure the number of grains that every other grain was in contact with, but we were able to string together enough steps to accomplish that. Is anyone interested in seeing that and measuring the number of contacting neighbors around each feature? Okay. And I think this would also then finally cover the pairing of structures that Katharina had suggested we cover, but I don't believe was able to join us. But if she watches the webinar online later, potentially this could be helpful. She's working with more biological images, wanting to count, say, number of cell nuclei inside of each cell, things like that. This won't take long. So we have our skeletonized boundaries, and what we need to do is first remove the branch points, which is why we had to skeletonize, so that we technically do have branch points. Sorry, Romulo, I don't know how you had raised your hand. I just saw the notification. Was that from a while ago, or did you have a question? Okay, well, we'll wait for Romulo to respond if you had a question. So if we stripped out, I'm going to put this up as the companion, just because I know I'm going to need it. If we go and from the skeletonization menu, if we remove the branch points, and what I think we'll add is a feature to just keep the branch points in addition to just removing them, because right now in order to keep them, you set up the companion, you remove, and then you do a let me remind myself what the operation is. If you invert the removed state and then keep lighter between it and the companion, now you've just kept the branch points in the image. So we're going to now dilate these points by a few pixels and invert that and keep lighter between it and the companion again, which is our skeletonized structure. So between this and this, we're going to keep lighter. So now we've started to erase the points of the branch points of the grain structure. And I'm now going to dilate my boundaries so they sneak underneath the features but don't connect. So now let me go back to my final grain segmentation, which was here, and I'm going to put that in memory so that I can recall it later. Sometimes this is how recipe building works. You realize you need to go back up and add steps. So here we have, and yes, this is a bug that was discovered and is already tracked on the site, I believe. If it's not, I'll post it, where the remove branch points function doesn't properly get executed either as part of a recipe update or as part of a loading of the recipe. So my apologies for that. Right now the workaround is to place another remove branch points above the one that didn't execute properly, and then remove the one that failed, because it works well, it works properly to be added to the recipe, just not to be automatically executed during an update or a loading process. So here is our dilated, separated grain structure that we're going to treat as the companion image, and we're going to bring back our grain structure. Now we can go into measure features, and we have a based on companion image panel here. So if we measure the number of features that are within the companion image underneath each feature in the current image, that in this case, because of how we've set up the companion image to be, and I'm sorry for this zoom issue. So the companion image has separated boundaries that are going to sit underneath every feature in this image here. Let me reset this. So here's our companion image with features that are going to be the basis of our measurement, and here we have the image we're actually measuring. So all of those dilated boundaries will sit right underneath, or part of them will sit underneath each feature in the current image. So if we choose to measure now all features based on this companion, I'm going to call these grains contacted. Sometimes the based on companion image features, the initial generation of those measurements takes a little bit longer than more traditional measurements. We've generated those now, and we're going to go and color these by measurements, and we're going to load in those. Okay, Matt, sorry I missed you. Thanks very much for attending. If you're still there, yes, please tune in to check out the rest when it's been posted. I appreciate your contributions. So here's our contacted grains, and if we color by those numbers, there we have it. With fewer number of features, the feature selecting works a little more quickly. So you can see this guy is surrounded by 15 grains, supposedly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, there are some smaller. I think that was 1. So what we need to do is possibly adjust, because I don't think 15 is accurate for that. We could be just clipping off bits of those dilated boundaries, and they're being treated as separate features along one grain, even though they're not. So what you could do is dilate the branch points by 1 more value, which would allow you to grow all of these boundaries by 1 more value without connecting them to each other. And now if I regenerate my contacted grains, I don't think we should ever have 15 grains in contact with a neighbor. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I only count 10 there, so I might need to dilate and do that 1 more time, but I think you get the idea. When you have features within features, you want to set up the ones that are within as the companion and the ones that surround and contain as the current image, and then you can do a measurements based off of the companion and measure, say, the average area of the ones that are inside of it or the number that are inside of it. So that's our way for pairing features together and measuring features based off others. And you can do that on a batch of images, of course, in the processed image editor, where when you go into feature measurements now, You know, imagine that you had, if we go back to our primary and secondary precipitates, if we had our primary as one layer, and our secondary as another. Sorry, it looks like we have a bug there from with renaming the layers. I've never seen that one before. We'll make sure that gets fixed. So if you had your secondary features, if you imagine they were inside of your primary, and you go to your primary features or your primary images here, and you want to get feature by feature how many features are inside of them, measurements for every image, you could go to feature measurements, and now as part of this interface it says based on layer instead of based on companion, and you could pick the secondary layer as the basis for your measurements, and then you'd get pairing of features on a batch basis. Okay, so is there anyone left? I don't want to completely avoid 3D since that's another one of MIPAR's capabilities. Ken, are you still with us? Would you like to see a run through of a quick 3D workflow? Sure. Maybe a quick stack of them. Yeah. Sure. Okay. I think you had also mentioned that you may have run into a bug or something trying to stack those few slices together, and we're wondering if it was the size of your images. Is that the case? Okay. I would still expect that batch to complete. I guess if you still run into that issue, contact me and send your log file or something, and we'll make sure you're not running into a bug. I can show you the the procedure that I would go through for it might be a bit more involved for this one particular data set. What I've got here is, this was a dual beam fib data set that Josh Einsel was very generous to provide, and he wanted to attend, but he couldn't. He had to make the other slot, so I like to show at least this data set in case he gets to see it later. So this is his raw data. He did run some non-local means filtering in another software. This is just what he provided me. So it's a dual beam fib data set where you've got this typical translation of the slices in the y direction in addition to any beam shift and drift that's going on. So what I want to do is first just I'll make a stack of all of those, and I'll just run a rough alignment on them. So in my batch processor, I'm not doing any segmentation this time around, and I'm saving them all to a pre-aligned folder, and I add all of my raw images, and I say align them and make a stack and go. Now I don't necessarily want to have everyone wait here. I think this takes a few minutes to stack up and align everything. If you believe me, it does complete. So I do have the stack that it produces once the process is done. So we'll take a look at that. I think, if I remember, it took 2 to 3 minutes for that stack to create. So in our 3D toolbox, we're going to open the stack file. I think I ran that twice. And now, because we had a lot of stationary features that were sitting around the sliced material, all of this ends up kind of dominating the alignment because it doesn't change at all from slice to slice. So you still end up with this gradual translation up in the field of view of your area of interest. So you could do a couple of things. You could crop the stack right now just to that area, and then once it's cropped, align the stack. The trouble there is that you're then only using your features for their own alignment, and if you have a bunch of random features, that can work. Okay, Johan, thanks so much. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. If you have a bunch of random features, they can kind of govern their own alignment, but if you have inclined features, they might artificially get straightened out by the alignment process. So it's kind of to your benefit to use a field of view that has basically a fiducial marker, which is the area of your the cross-sectional area and its boundaries. So what I would recommend in this case, especially if you're working with dual beam fib data sets, is you've gotten rid of the drift from that first pre-alignment stage, and the only translation that's left is inherent to the focused ion beam instrument, where it's imaging at a 52-degree incidence, hence the reason for that Y translation. So I take my stack of images here, and I exported them back into images into my pre-aligned folder. So I just spat the stack out into a folder of images again, and then I just run those back through the batch processor. This time I can even add in my segmentation recipe now to find my features if I want to make my workflow more efficient and don't want to jump between apps any further. But just to keep the workflow clearer for this demo, I'm going to split it up, into the 3 separate tasks: the pre-alignment, the area of interest tracking, and then the segmentation, which will allow rendering of features. So again, we're having no recipe. We're going to, this time, put the output into our aligned and cropped folder. We're going to use the pre-aligned images that I just exported from the, or did I not? Maybe I didn't do that ahead of time. So images, export to images into the pre-aligned folder. And what you can do in MIPAR is set up, and this has been most helpful for our dual beam data sets, is set up a initial area of interest on the first slice, and then calculate what that upward drift in fact is, and have that box slide through the data set so that you don't sacrifice more volume than you need to by trying to fit a crop box to the volume that stays mutually inside of the area of interest. So that looks like this. You take your pre-aligned, drift-corrected images, whatever you want to call them, and we set up area of interest tracking. We just walk through this workflow here. The first step is to open the first slice to be processed. And we then open a subsequent slice. At least the 10th one is recommended, but I might go even higher and say 50 slices later. 50 slices between images. Now I draw a crop on the left-hand image to set my first AOI. Thank you, Lazar. Let me know how I can be of assistance. I will work on the images that you sent and get a recipe and those results to you hopefully by tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for attending. So we've set up our first area of interest, and we're going to mark some fiducial marker. I like to use the corner of a face here. Press enter, and then mark edge 2. Try to mark the same feature in a slice 50 slices later. And now this calculates, it says you've got about a pixel drift up per slice, at least between slices 1 and 50, and we expect that movement to be consistent throughout the series. So we accept all of that, and we're also going to tilt correct the images because they were taken at 52 degrees. We don't need to align. If we checked align, what it would be doing is it would be aligning the AOI tracked tilt corrected sub areas and then adding it to the stack. But we're pretty sure that if we just accurately track that upward motion with this tool, we don't need to do this again. So we're going to make another stack now that is AOI tilt correct based. And that should not take too long. It's reading these images off of a server, so the initial running through, what it's doing first is it just makes sure that the dimensions of all of your slices are the same. Otherwise, it's not going to bother doing whatever it needs to on all of them if there's a dimension mismatch. So we've just got about a minute of time there. So once the stack is made, then hopefully that's our final alignment state. And while this is running, there'll be a little bit of lag, but we should be able to still use the image processor. So I'm going to go open, let me just take one of those slices here and start playing around with the recipe while the batch is running. I think all that you're going to need here is just an adaptive threshold, probably 100 and 100 to start. We're not going to have all that extraneous stuff to worry about, so I think that should be the extent of what you need. And we'll accept and invert, and there we found our features. So I'm just going to save this as into the reconstructed here as fine particles. Let's go back to our batch that is still 41 seconds away. So if I had made that recipe before I ran the batch, I could have loaded that in and then elected to make a reconstruction in addition to all of this other stuff. You wouldn't even need to make a stack, since the stacking is usually for the preliminary processing where you're doing this alignment and cropping and tilt correcting. But we could have just thrown the tilt corrected and AOI tracked images right into their volume using the recipe and ended up with a full reconstructed and segmented volume without an additional step. But there we have that stack. Let's open it and see what it gave us. We should have pretty nicely aligned features there. If you want to refine the alignment further, which we might need to, because there's a little bit of dancing up and down. I know I said you want to avoid using these features for their own alignment, but it looks like they're perpendicular to the imaging plane anyway. So if I just run a edit align stack for slice using translation, that just will reperform the alignment here. I don't want to take up any more of folks' time, so let's assume it refines the alignment and there's less jitter. Now again, we would put these back out into images, and what we are trying to add in 7 or 8 is we've always used the batch processor kind of as the hub to get things into 3D, but more and more folks are wanting to be able to open stacks just directly into the 3D toolbox, DICOM or OIF stacks, or even be able to take a stack that you've already assembled and just directly turn it into a reconstruction, even though that won't allow you to apply a recipe to every slice, which is one advantage to running through the batch processor. But that might avoid going back and forth between these applications so much. So let me take the fine particles recipe. We'll save the output in the reconstructed folder. We're going to use the aligned and cropped series that we just exported. And now we will need to calibrate the magnification in this case, because we're making a volume and we need to know the pixel dimensions. I believe Josh had told me that, we go back to the raw image here, that the width across here that's actually the edge of the image right there. I'm trying to work on that. Pardon me? Right. Yeah, right now the mechanism is to have that as a series of images and make your reconstruction in a MIPAR format using the batch processor. But I really hope to, by the next release, allow you to just directly open that stack in the 3D toolbox. So we know this length, I believe, is 6.7 microns. So now we have our XY factor. These were, we don't need this anymore. We don't need this. We don't need this. We're going to make a reconstruction. These are 50 nanometer slices. This is our segmentation recipe. And this will then make us a volume that we can visualize. Okay, we'll let that go, and let's see what, I think we've just about hit everyone's requests otherwise. Yeah, is there any, did you have any other questions, Ken? That could be a wise idea. Right now, in this on development stage, we've been relying on tutorials, webinars, and the other help features to help train, but a formal course would, right. Sure. Okay. Sure. No, that's definitely something we're willing to do, especially if there's interest. Okay, that's good to know. Does anyone else out there have lingering questions that we can cover while this batch is finishing up here in the next couple of minutes? Let's see how many are still with us. We've got 10 still on the hook. Yeah, I got about 10. See if I recall anyone who had any burning questions. Stacy, if you're still with us, did you have any other things that you were hoping to learn to be able to relay to your other colleagues? Maybe she's otherwise indisposed. That's fine. Okay, looks like everyone's pretty satisfied for the moment. yes. Oh yes, we were using that exclusively before we developed this. Sure. Yeah, definitely. I think that's, we like to think we've done that and then some with the interface. I think if there are though some additional features of Fovea that you do rely on that you don't see here, where we welcome that feedback and can try to add those in. I know there are some conventional stereological tools like drawing, what's the term? The nonlinear grid of lines, cycloid grids onto your image to measure intercepts that way. We offer random and rotating line grids to measure intercepts for stereological type measurements. But some of those nonlinear lines we might need to add in. I think they do have a pretty, if I remember, there's a pretty extensive filter list when it comes to right. Yeah, we can definitely support all of that now. Inside of your, if I go back to my example here, these grains. So you take your, okay. Potentially, yeah. If there's enough of a need for it, we can explore that. It's okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the challenge with Linux, is the version fragmentation and compiling in all of the different versions and that are used. But yeah, we want to be as accommodating as we can. If you took your feature image here and you said morphology replace with centroid, and you can't really see it because they're 1 pixel large. So if we just do do a little dilation, now you've got the centroids marked on the image. Things like that. Yeah, the sky is somewhat the limit with the recipes. So let's take the reconstruction file. Where are you located? Okay. Been there a few times. You're with who again? Okay. Yes. Those are big players. Mark DeGraff. I don't think he's still at CMU. I don't know if you know that name, but he's huge in the all kinds of areas. Oh, you do? Okay. Oh, I don't know. He did a sabbatical actually here at Ohio State for about a year in our microscope facility. But yeah, I imagine he's still at CMU as a faculty. Yeah. Okay, so here's our volume. What we're looking at here is we just opened it up. Here's the binary segmentation. So if you slide through here, those are the segmented features. We're looking at an XY view right now. So here's a cross view looking in the YZ and XZ direction. Here's the reference data slicing from the XZ. Not very exciting to look at 2D images in 3D, so if you do view volume here, you just get a ortho slice rendering here. If you want to make it bigger, we can kick this out into the animation window here and use the XY direction. So this is, I think we're a little slower here because of the screen recording, but our typical workflow is to kind of do all of the processing and the alignment, the segmentation, and everything, which usually take up most of the time in MIPAR, do some visualizing along the way, but then end up exporting your raw or segmented data sets into something like a Viso, in fact, or other open source viewers like ParaView for the real high performance rendering and nice animation tools that they offer. Yes, yeah. So yeah, if you take if you wanted your labels view here, which is every feature, I don't need that anymore. Let me zoom in here so we can see. So these are all colored according to being separate 3D features. Yes, yes. So first thing you could do is say I want to just visualize this guy. Oh, this is a Dell workstation here. This is a desktop, yeah. But with the screen sharing and the screen recording, it's much less responsive than I'm used to. 16, I got 16 in this one here, 16 gigabytes, and it's a 8-core processor. It's an older 8-core Xeon. It's actually, yeah, it's not as performant as I would expect. We're running virtual machines here that use less resources over, remote interfaces, and they're in many cases faster than this thing. I have I think a Quadro 600 graphics and a Tesla GPU in here for GPU computation. So there's an easy way to get a visualization on what that feature looks like in 3D. It's got this pretty funky microstructure there. But you could take your entire labels matrix where every feature is filled with voxels according to its ID. And if we want to see what that ID is, if we double click on that, that's feature number 1038. Okay. So we're always updating the labels every time you make a modification to your segmentation. Unless you uncheck this, it's recalculating the separate features in the volume. So you could take your labels view and export the reconstruction to a Viso, and this would then give you a text file with associated images that you could open up directly into a Viso and come with all the metadata and voxel dimensions and everything. We usually do that to put the final polish on the rendering. VTK is ParaView, yeah, so you can manually do the export like that, or we even have this, if we want to say do a nice volume rendering on the reference data, we have this power render feature that does an export into VTK, and then this button won't be lit up if you don't have ParaView installed and sitting in the right directory, named as ParaView. I think I cover that in the visualizing 3D reconstruction tutorial. I show you where to put the ParaView installation. I think that the problem here is that I'm exporting this VTK across to our network server, so that's why it's taking a little bit of time. But yeah, that VTK will export and then it'll open directly into ParaView. That's the idea, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. Let me check on where this is going to. I think this is coming into this folder here. Yeah, so we're up to... Let's just... Yeah, unfortunately, some of these processes are not cancelable. We'll give it a few more seconds and see if it plays nicely. Stacy, I'm not sure if you're back with us. Are you there? Doesn't look like it. I'll just check back again. Anyone else have any questions that they were hoping to get covered? Okay. Yeah, sorry about this. Let me just kill this and I'll just show you the mechanism for measuring 3D features. And I'll actually take our reconstruction file. I'm not sure. AR. Okay. Let's open this up. Not that big a file. Okay. Oh, sorry to hear that. Okay. Yeah. It's also sometimes annoying just the way the dimensions are set up in the viewer here. What you can do is choose to transpose the reconstruction about the z-axis, and that'll flip it so that it's more aligned with the dimension of the viewer here. You can get a better view of the features. So yeah, we took a look at rendering a few of those by double clicking on them. If we want to do, say, feature measurements, we could output the volume and centroid of every feature into a spreadsheet. And we just about have finished the ability to read that data back in as the basis of colorization, so you can color features based on their measurements. But if you just wanted a global volume fraction, it's right there, 0.9%. Like a FEA type, yeah, finite element, FEM. Not at the moment. The best I could do is say export if you, I'm not sure what kind of data it can handle. It'll probably be a little slow, but you could visualize and make a surface rendering of all of the features, and then this export surface menu would light up, and you'd be able to export that surface into an STL format. And Abacus might then be able to make a volumetric mesh of that STL surface. I'm not sure. I know Aviso. Well, I know Autodesk's. What's that? Okay. Right. No, to be honest, MIPAR is definitely not going to be the speediest with that amount of data loaded in. Yeah. No, yeah, meshing isn't something that we support right now. I've done that type of work, and I think I've used Autodesk products. Okay, sorry if I missed you, Meg. Thank you very much. We should set up some more information sessions for you and your folks as soon as possible. I think used Autodesk products to make a volume mesh. I think their CFD simulation software can take a surface mesh and make a volume out of it, and then put it into. And I know Simpleware is another solution. They're all about meshing 3D data sets. But yeah, hopefully we can at least help you segment the features so there's something to make a mesh out of. So that was for Josh's data set here, making a reconstruction out of his features. And you can take a couple of these things. Of course not. Yeah, basic stuff. We really like Aviso's animation producer for the really nice movies. But yeah, when this is finished, I'll just give you a quick look at that. Yeah, exactly. So there are them colored according to label, and if you go take your animator here, you could turn the axes on, turn the labels on, make a rotating movie, probably just around the Z-axis is fine. I'll just put this on the desktop. Export. We do support making stereoscopic movies. I don't use that very much. Tells you adjust the size of your window, and then just some warning messages. It is, but we can work on that. Just about everything, actually. It's one of the more operating system agnostic formats that is also compressed. I haven't had any issue opening those on Windows or Macintosh. QuickTime opens them, Windows Media Player opens them. And the other option for movie making is a clipping movie, and usually use that for like showing you slicing through your reconstruct or aligned reference data. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what happened to my background there. That's weird. Reconstructed. Oh, I put that on the desktop. Test. There's your. snapshot. Yeah, it's growing fast, so it's very helpful to have sessions like this to get feedback from a lot of folks. Are there any last questions out there? I think we still have 7 folks with us. Looks like we are pretty satisfied for today. Checking my list here, I think we've hit just about all 11 topics in some form or another. Hopefully the entire webinar serves as a nice general overview. We will have some updates to issue regarding what's coming next, whether it's going to be sort of a phase 2 of the beta program or a post-beta. We're not quite sure what we're going to call it yet, but the first 90-day licenses are going to be expiring in mid-March, so there should be some details coming out on exactly what the options for continuing are. So the major announcements, I guess, would be that some future details are just around the corner. The recipe store is in development, and we're trying to decide exactly how to roll that out. We really want to make that an open repository for all to use and contribute to. And Beta 7, which will include a lot of suggestions made here today, as well as a whole list of other feature requests and many bug fixes. I expect that to be out certainly in the next 2 weeks. Okay, Camillo, thanks very much. Let me know how else I can help. If that is it, I know we ran about an hour over time, but I really appreciate everyone sticking with it. We'll have hopefully much less of an overhead next time getting the audio set up, now that we've got the method of operation down over here. I think we have been able to successfully record this as far as I can tell, so we'll let that video process overnight and then try to upload it tomorrow morning if the website cooperates. I think that's pretty much all that I have here for today. Ken, did you have any other things you wanted covered, since you're still... No. So, well, you were among, I think, the first to get the beta license, if I recall. So 90 days from your activation date is when that would stop working. You can check that date if you take your... you don't need an internet connection. It would help, because then you could go to the activation page through the website. But if you still have your install instructions from the install pack, then you can also click on the activation page link inside of those instructions. I'll just show you going to the website here and the download page. So here on the activation page, if you go to your Sentinel keys list, and I've got a bunch of them in here, but you'll just have one listed, and you go to your features section. This should have a time period, 90 days, and it'll then tell you the start date and the end date of that license. And this week, I hope to, with all of my colleagues and supervisor here, we're going to have the roadmap for what comes after the 90 days cleared up, and we'll let you know exactly what the deal with that is. I'm not sure how many, like the first 90-day licenses went out on the 17th of December. I'm not sure how many folks activated on that day. Probably not many, but yeah, what we'll end up doing is, you know, whatever the policy is moving forward, we'll just ask for your expiration date, and we'll go from there. Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I hope it was helpful. No problem. We will, I'll gauge interest again after Beta 7 comes out, maybe, and we make it clear to everyone what's coming after Beta. I'll gauge interest for the next webinar, and we'll see what kind of topics you want to dive into. So that's going to do it for me today. Like I said, if you want any of the recipes that were built, I mean, I'm sure you could recreate them from watching the video and adding the steps, but we should be able to, once I clear any requests with the folks that distributed the images, we can send any out that you need. Thank you all. I appreciate your attention very much, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.